Yeah.
So that's why I'm figuring out what that purpose is. So is that like the right way to approach?
Yeah, again, there is no right or wrong way, but yeah, making things coincident is a very typical way to do it, and is good. So for example, I just exited out to undo my changes. But again, now if I drag this point, so really this eight and a quarter inch dimension isn't really defining much. It's actually really only defining the center line. And the center line does not appear to be attached to anything other than this dimension here, which is not, it's an understandable dimension. But because you guys see how it changes this angle, it's not a great dimension. So that's better done if like somehow this is either set to be coincident here, because, oh, that just totally exploded. Let's see. To make those coincident, now this dimension will no longer angle as this drags. They'll move together in a straight line. Or another way to do that would be to take my line tool here. I should also load, I think it's called key press. Wait, no, where is it? Sorry. There we go. There we go. Now it's loading. Sorry. Okay, so I'm talking about this dimension here and how it changes angle when things move. One way to do it is to make this line coincident to that point. The other way is this is a good place to use a construction line, which we talked about when we were reviewing the things. So you can make a line and you want to check this box for construction. And now if I connect these and tell this line to be horizontal. Now, had I drawn it horizontal to begin with, it would default to that. I'll show you guys if I draw a line here. Do you see how that yellow, do you guys see this yellow box that appears on my cursor? That's telling me that it's going to give it that property of horizontal. And so now when I select this line, you'll see it's listed here. So I drew the line at an angle to show you guys how it changed to dash for when it was made for construction. So that's one change I would make to the master sketch, is have those tie in. You could, like, do you see how this is jumping? That's good, they're tangent, and it's keeping that tangency. You could fix this. You could define that, and that should prevent that from happening now. So that's, yeah. Yeah. It was not. Let's look at it. It's taking this line and pulling it. So the line starts this way, and then that point gets dragged, and the line comes out the opposite side. Does that make sense? So this line right here, if I hit Control Z, is this line right here. What happens is this point goes until it becomes 0, and then goes negative. In fact, we can watch it if I drag it really slowly. You see how the point is getting closer and closer and closer? Now the line is coming out the other side. And so here's what I'm doing. As I'm dragging this down, I'm watching what's moving, right? I can see the top. This is staying fixed because that's defined. But let's say I don't want that to happen. That's why now I know that if I define this length here, now I can drag this and see what changes. And we're pretty good. This curve on the inside changes. Sometimes, and again, I'll show you guys my model. I treat the push-up a little bit differently. I actually don't attach the push-up. So here's like one thing. Here's another way that this could have been treated. There's no right or wrong, right? There are some things that could be better. This is my 2 cents of probably how I would treat this. I would want the push-up height to move with the base so that doesn't change. I might like want this to also move with the base, this height to be fixed. So pick this line, pick this point. And now let's see what happens when this moves. Oh, geez. It is. You get a sense for it.
Yeah, because like just watching you, you already knew like what to fix. Now you go into the main.
Because I'm seeing like, yeah, I'm just judging what's moving,
Just
right?
watching what's moving.
Yeah,
So like so like if you're watching that point go from all the way to 0 to negative, it made you kind of like realize that well this is fixed, this isn't fixed, so it's happening this point.
right. I'm watching what point is moving.
Okay, that makes sense.
So here now I have it defined. I broke up the push up from here just to keep it separate. I can always do this late. I can always trim this later, put a little fillet in here. But now when I drag this, right, when I go up, I have issues with, because this point is fixed, I'm starting to have issues up here. But now the whole bottom moves together as one seamless one. And that's because everything that's related to the bottom is kind of defined off of this bottom point. This becomes kind of like a new origin reference point. Does that make sense to you guys to some degree? Okay. Yep. Yeah, I mean, so I almost treat this push up as its own entity. That's like one way to think about it. Like I just have a straight line for the bottom. If we open up my sriracha bottle, um, let's see where this is. It should be, I can show you what I did, and it's for the push-up. Again, that's not necessarily a requirement that the push-up be treated separately. But here you'll notice like my base is defined from my origin here. So now to move this down, and you see, like this is a lot more simple of a push-up. So I have the push-up defined off of this base. What I don't have defined is how far this arc is. But because it's just an up and down motion, not a left-right, like this arc remains untouched as I drag this up and down. So sometimes you can over-define stuff. Like if this arc was attached to something else, it can be also a little messy. Like it maybe, I think obviously this is a lot more simple of a model than the one Alexis picked. But here you can see I have the overall depth of the bottle from the origin by the 6.55. I have the overall width, and they're all defined from kind of this bottom point. I have the height of the push-up, and that's it. So like this is a lot fewer dimensioning, but it's clean. It moves up and down. Now, obviously, again, it changes per bottle. So going back to Alexis's, it's a little bit more complicated because there's all this stuff. But honestly, I probably would have started the same way. If I were to like hypothetically delete all this stuff, this is again where I would, starting at this point, I would define the overall bottom from the origin, not from the top. So that's one major change I would make. And now this bottom line should be black. And that's a good sign. And now I would want all of this stuff to be defined from this base because I would want this to move as the base moved. I don't want this to grow as the base comes down. Same with here. I would want, this is a little bit more unique of a push-up. I appreciate the accuracy there. I would want this push-up to move again with the base. And since I'm anticipating a vertical growth, the left-right shouldn't matter too much. We'll see. There's a chance this will move, but I'm going to guess it's not going to. I could be proved wrong. So here's okay, it is moving. Now there's a chance that I'm missing a relationship. This seems good. There's a chance that that's just not the way it's going to work. Another check would be to delete this temporarily and drag this and see what's changing. We can see that if we quickly let's see if we just define these. Whoops, sorry. These are arcs, and so you can just define their radiuses by hitting D and then clicking on them. They'll stay that same radius size, and there you go, this is moving now. You'll also notice that as I define that, this line then turned black, so there was an added definition there. Now we can see what's changing here. which like you can see this angle changes. So maybe like just defining a little bit more here can help. Maybe these need to be defined. Or again, if it's moving left to right, maybe you do need this then. But it is this kind of like dimension in check. So now we're pretty good. Things are dragging. And that's something you want your model to be able to do. You want the bottom to grow without a lot changing. Now, see, here's a good opportunity for like, I would then do the same kind of treatment to the shoulder area. And then same kind of treatment to the top here. So just in recap, if I look at this, so I'm undoing all my changes. This is probably one of the bigger errors. I would have the origin, which sometimes it can be hard to find. It's right here. I would have that defined to the top. I would make sure this line was coincident with that or merged with this point. And then same with the bottom, I would have this origin defined down here. And then having this line and this origin point be coincident, so they move together. Does that all make sense? Let's see, this is a really nice touch. That's a good, we kind of talked about this, having a construction line to define the overall width. And again, we talked about how they push in the line up. Cool. Any other questions or comments? I think the best way, yeah, it comes from feel. And I know, you know, it's maybe not what you guys want to hear me say, but like, in general, you want to think about the major dimensions. In this instance, these are the key dimensions right here. It's helpful from the origin to have a baseline defined. And that line should just be black. It should be horizontal, it should be black, everything. There should be things built off of that. The overall width should be defined. If your model has kind of a weird like profile, weird meaning having bump outs like your redesign Alexis, that's where it's helpful to have this line to define how wide that is. And I mean, yeah, you know, and then the rest does come from kind of dragging to see. So you want to start with the overall dimensions. And then again, it's all about relationships to each other. So now that I have the bottom defined, I want to make sure that anything that's related to the bottom is defined from this baseline, not from the top. So that's why my push-up is defined this way. If you can like make your life a little bit easier by simplifying the push-up, I mean, again, it's good you did the accurate thing and did the push-up exactly how it was. But sometimes push-ups don't have to be too complex. And again, here, like I'm not, here's what's being simplified is I'm not building in that fillet. I'm putting that in at the end because it's like kind of a hidden part. It's less important to the overall form of the model is why I made that decision. And again, for the simplicity of as this bottom moves, to not have there be too many fussy things. If there's another curve in here, another arc, then that's one more thing to define. And again, granted, I did tell you guys to build in all your arcs in your sketch. It was kind of just a simple one solid answer. But it is, again, a lot of things are nuanced as to like what your goals are. Cool. Any other comments or questions? Let's look at this. Yeah. I'd probably delete it or move stuff. I won't save this when I close it. All right, cool. Moving on. Just gonna go down the list in here, and the redesign is, I'm assuming this one. No, I think I had you. I did notice though that there was one file that was in project one and there was one file in homework. So I don't know which one There's one you uploaded yesterday and 3 you uploaded today. I'm assuming the 3 today are the latest ones. Okay. Okay. No, it's fine. Yeah, this is a folder on mine. Yep. So let's look at this came up so you guys can see how this was done. Good example. So it looks like is this your reference sketch? Okay, that you sketched this on the side. I see. I was wondering if you traced the lightning bolt from the reference sketch. You just kind of made it up. No, that's fine. Well, but let's talk about that though. It's totally fine you made it up for this project, but if you're trying to be accurate, it would have made more sense to draw the lightning bolts on this front plane and to look at the sketch for that reference. Let's.
I think you know why? Because that's how you're. Remember the one that you did? So I tried doing it, but I don't know why like it wouldn't. So I was like, you know, how does that this?
Oh, sure, I got you. Okay. Oh, because I put one in there and you're having issues. Okay. You can. Yeah, it is possible to export an Illustrator file as, I think, a DXF or a DWG, I think. And for sure, you can go Illustrator to SOLIDWORKS. The nuances right now off the top of my head, I don't remember. I've never tried copying splines directly. That honestly may work. It's worth a try. But yeah, when you're working for clients, often getting the logo in vector is a good thing to do. You'd also be surprised. You can Google a lot of, if you're doing school projects, there's a lot of vector logos online for major companies. So let's look at this sketch. Okay, so pretty simple. You guys all know you can make a sketch. It's closed form. You can extrude it. Here's where the setting is. So this always defaults to blind, where you type in a value of how far you want this to go. There's lots of options in here. There's through all, which just means make an infinite extrusion through everything. This is pretty rare. I've never used this to create a body. I've used it for a cut. Like cutting through all is sometimes useful. Like blow everything away. I don't care what's there. Just hit it all. Up to vertex is up to a point. So this is something that you would pick in a sketch or maybe an intersection of 2 lines or something. Up to surface would stop it at a surface. This is more robust than offset from surface, which is the next option. So sometimes you're working on something complex, you're trying to offset from the surface, it's not working. You can manually offset a surface, create an artificial surface, and extrude to that surface. It sometimes works better for what it's worth. Up to body would be just like, this is a good thing for joining, like if you want to merge things together. Just whenever it hits that next body, stop there. I've never used mid-plane, I think is both directions. Yeah. So I believe this is 2 inches from the center is what mid-plane is. But anyway, what Anand did was offset from surface. You pick this one, and then you put in the value of how far offset you want it to be. 0.05 inches. You can reverse the offset. And here, merge result. You can not merge it. But then the next thing he did was he created a pattern based on that. So instead of doing that sketch another time for the other face, this is another feature. What he has to pick here is, so firstly it's asking which direction. So he picked a line in the center. This is what it revolves around. Then he says how many degrees he wants it to be across. This is full 360. He has 4 lightning bolts, right? He can change that value and have as many lightning bolts as he wants. And then here he's saying what is getting repeated. And in this instance, he's picking a feature. Again, for what it's worth, the bodies is a more robust way to pattern things if you're patterning something complex. Yeah. Yeah, good question. So what command is this circular pattern? So let's say you have this. It's under here at the top. It's hidden under linear patterns. If you click on this, there's a bunch of options. There's circular pattern. If I walk you through the steps, if we click on that, it runs us through our options here. So I guess here it's defaulting for me to pick what I want to pattern. If I click on the lightning bolts, it will default to that feature. Then here, the direction that I want it to go around, since I know it's a circular pattern, so I know it's a revolve, like it wants the central access location. So I click on this. And then here it defaults to 360. I can type in 4. You know, if I only want it to be over half the bottle, I can make it evenly spaced over half the bottle. Equal spacing is checked. A really good way to learn SolidWorks is to actually open existing files and go to the tree, drag this all the way to the top, and drag it down one step at a time just to get a sense of how it was built, and stopping when you see a new feature that you don't recognize. So like here you get to split. It's like, okay, what is split? You can right click on it and say edit feature. And now it looks like, okay, so the trim tools, it's using a plane. Trim always means cut. So it looks like he's using a plane here. If I uncheck this, what happens? Okay, if I check this, it looks like it's checking this bottom body. So just like literally playing with these features is one way to learn SolidWorks. When I got my first job at my firm, when people didn't have time to teach me, I'd be like, hey, I have to build a razor. How do I do that? You know, the other designers are busy. They'll be like, there's an old razor from this project. Open it up and just go through the tree, see how it's built, and copy it. That's like a valid way to learn. And as we go, I'm going to provide files for you guys. So I did put my bottles on there. I just mentioned it in passing in an email. I didn't fully explain why they were on there. I just said for your guys' reference. That's kind of what I was getting at, but that's something you could go through. So now we see there's a split. We saw that body was checked. I can also notice now, I can try and pay attention. Up here it says solid bodies 2. If I drag this above the split, solid bodies 1. So now, I mean, I knew where to look. Not that you guys may not know to look there, but you can kind of guess, you can infer what the feature does by just looking at it. Very long explanation to just say that. We now have 2 circular patterns, so this other one got affected. Cool, does that offset make sense to you guys? Here, let's look at the master file real quick. So again, I'll be honest with you guys, when I see the bottom line not defined as black, that like gives me a little bit of concern, because like now there's nothing defining this, right? If I'm trying to change the height by 1/4 inch, I have to make this step here. So here, let's make this 5.5, see what happens. Awesome, nice work. Because like Ined has this defined from down here. So it moves down. If this were defined, sometimes SolidWorks does weird stuff like this too. That moved back up, this stayed down here. I think it's a visual error. But now had he had this defined from the top, the origin, which maybe you want it to be fixed, right? Maybe this point is more important than from the base. I mean, I'm assuming that the design is related to the base. But now that design just changed a lot because I defined that from the top. So he had it defined correctly to begin with. The only thing, again, I would say the major thing I'm noticing off the bat, I would have the origin to the base defined. It's the same thing. I'd have the top to the origin defined, like this. Yeah, does that make sense? Pretty simple file, but I think everything looks pretty good. I don't know, other things that may be worth defining is maybe like the height of this neck to here, if you want to keep that consistent. Now the split, so technically my advice was to do the cap and the body as a different revolve, as 2 different revolves, and to not merge them. Split, in theory, is an extra command, which is fine. It's a different command than a revolve. However, making the plane was an extra step. So like, if I'm nitpicking, that's a little less efficient because you had to then create this plane. Does that make sense? Now, let's see. It might have been possible for you. If in here you had like, I forget where you had your split. This line isn't really doing much for me. If instead this line was really long and for construction, I don't know if this will work. It probably won't work for a split. But basically, if you had a line in here, you maybe could have gotten away with doing a split command. So the split command, it's right here. So what the split is asking you for is, okay, what do you want to use to trim the body? So in this case, I'm going to try and look at my sketches to see if I can see this line. I wonder if I can select this line. No, I can't. It's selecting the whole sketch, so that doesn't work. So yeah, you could create a plane like you did. I could create a line through here. This is an instance where it would make sense to make this line collinear with the master. The way the master sketch works, whenever you can point to it or define something to it, the better. In general, that's just a good rule of thumb to go to. And again, that's why the master sketch build model is a little more robust. It encourages you to define things from the, these are very simple files, so there's not a lot of features. But as your feature grows, your feature tree grows longer, the more things that are defined to the master sketch, the more robust your file will be. If you define the length of something to another feature, if that feature gets deleted or changes, you're going to get an error in your file. And we'll see that with project 2. That should be a little more clear. But anyway, you can also split with a line. So I just made a line. It's tied to the master. I can pick the split tool here again. I can say I want this line to be the split. When I go down here, if I click on this body, it gives me different options. You only have to check one to have that split. So it is possible to split without a plane. I don't know what you based your plane off of. So ideally, with this split, this plane should be defined to the master sketch, ideally. It's not. That would be more robust if it was defined to the master sketch. Now, the reason for that is, now if I change your model and I build it differently, this plane is still going to happen, 0.2 inches above from the origin. Where like, I don't know, maybe this grew or something. So it's always better when in doubt. So the way to do that, instead of setting distance here, would be to go to the second reference here and click this line. I don't know how to undo this. Here we go, parallel. That's what I need to do. So I'm saying it should be parallel to the top plane, but it should be through this line in the master sketch. And now that plane will move as the master sketch moves. Does that nuance make sense to you guys? Like, it is exactly that. It's just a nuance. But whenever you point to the master sketch as opposed to something else or something completely defined independently, your rebuilds will be more robust. It's kind of, again, it's just a clean way of working. Cool. Any questions on anything? All right, let's move on. If we need to take another break in the middle of this, I know I'm doing a lot of talking. Feel free to just ask for that. Or if you guys want me to speed stuff up, I just don't want to. I want to make sure I'm giving everyone fair attention to their files for feedback. That's great. Sure, absolutely. No, please, you guys should be vocal. I'm happy. Okay. Josh, is this your latest model here?
Yes, that is that's the original one, yes.
That's the original one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the original, right? We're looking at the redesign. Okay. How about the redesign with the neck?
It's called.
That's okay. I clicked away immediately after asking you. Is this it?
Cool. Wait.
Okay, let's go here. So this is what I'm seeing. Project 1. Okay. That's a great question. Personally, I don't mind, but if you guys would find that helpful, I'm happy to recommend it. I think as long as all I care about is that it's clear. The reason I was like sitting and thinking is it might be good practice for me to implement one, because that is something, again, like if I'm trying to simulate what you guys might experience at a firm or something. Every place is different, but there are places that have naming conventions where it's like date or project number, name, whatever. It's a great question though. I think just some thoughts on naming conventions. It's kind of a joke, but always avoid naming something final because inevitably there's going to be another change, and then that becomes incredibly confusing when there's final and then there's final, or there's like so like typically like my preference is I like to do rev one and just like count up. I tend to do like, this might be far too fussy, but this is just, again, my personal reference. I tend to do Rev 01A because, and then anytime there's a major change, that's when I'll jump up to like 02. But like, as long as it's the same general idea and it's just tweaks to it, that'll be A, B, C, D. And then whenever like there's a major change or it's after like a formal critique, then I would go to Rev 2. That's my 2 cents. For like, if I'm trying to be like absolutely crystal clear, transparent with the clients, I will definitely put the date in there because the date will always, I know you can always check the file and see when it's last built, but that's technically an extra step. Depending on who the client is, they don't know to look for that. So always just having the date in there somewhere is even better than like Rev 1, because who knows, you may have gone back to like, you may get to Rev 3 and they'd be like, you know what, it looked better in the beginning, let's go back to that or something. And then you can always have that date on there. For revision, sorry, yeah, good question. Or sometimes I'll literally just put R because it revision round, and that's just me. There's nothing behind that. That's just my preference. Cool. So ideally, Josh, ideally you would have your reference sketch. So whatever that hand sketch is in this instance, since it's the redesign, followed by the master, where it looks like you have both those things maybe in this sketch. It's not the end of the world, but again, it's all about just like clean file organization. So anyone want to guess the main reason why you don't want this sketch in the master? Yeah, you can accidentally click on it, drag it around. Sometimes it's like, this is my preference, sometimes it's confusing to see that file in there. So that's the reason for that. Now, a file that's this simple, not the end of the world that the master's in here. But again, I'm trying to teach you guys like best practice, right? When you have a really complex file, you don't want the master sketch disappearing within something. My workaround, if you happen to make that mistake, hopefully you don't, but was to go here. You can always change tree display to show flat tree view, then the sketches are visible. Again, if you have a really long file, that's confusing, especially if you're not used to that. I personally don't like it. You can always go in here. If you click on this, let's see, click on it once and then click on it again, it should allow you to rename it. But for this project, unfortunately, it was a requirement to have the sketch reference, the physical photo reference in its own sketch, the master in its own sketch, and then get in the practice of copying the file over. So yeah, it's unfortunate that that worked out that way. Again, you want to be able to check volume. Now, as far as the master goes, so same thing, here you have the origin at the bottom, which that becomes an issue now because, again, you want the neck finish to remain consistent. Also, you do want the cap to be part of the master too, ideally. Yeah. Now, it looks to me like you don't have anything defined off this origin. So, but now the question is, how is this defined here? Which I'm a little bit baffled. Is this really the true origin of the file? It is. Did you end up using a fixed point somewhere? Okay. Yeah, I'm baffled. Honestly, I don't know what's going on because you have all this defined, but it looks to me like you have nothing coming off this origin. Unless, actually, wait, here you go. This is probably it. There you go. I'm assuming you're referencing this line. So let's see if I drag this like all the way up. And this is why you don't want to have weird coincidences like that. You see that? So ideally, and again, that's how you avoid errors in SolidWorks, is having clean file structure. So again, when in doubt, you should always define off the origin. And now see, like I control Z through everything I did, and it's still goofed up. And again, that comes just from, here we go. I guess I didn't go far back enough. Yeah, does that make sense? Basically, you want to go off of the origin, not off of this like line. It looks like you intended this file to be the master, but I don't know if you moved on or what happened there. But
So you're saying I should have drew the line from the origin and then cut the photo, close that sketch, open a new sketch, traced over that, define that, made it the master sketch, close that, made a new sketch, traced over the master sketch?
so I'll be honest, you lost me. This is what my advice was: to start with a line to get the overall height.
Right.
To drop in a new sketch and align the height of the photo. Okay, sorry. You start with a line, that's the height. You take a new sketch and put the photo in there,
Right.
and you scale the photo to match the line.
Right, to match the top of the CAD to the bottom.
Yeah. Correct. Or, well, the line to begin with, top of the cap to bottom of the bottom. But you're right, yes. Mari brings up a good point. You then, once you have the size of the photo, you want to align the photo where the neck is to the origin,
Okay.
the top of the neck.
Okay.
After that, you want to go back to your original line sketch, either delete it, get rid of it, or what my recommendation was when I demoed it was to take that sketch and drag it below.
Okay.
So here, if I just edit your file, that would be, let's say the photos in here, it would be literally taking the sketch and drag, well, actually I can't drag it because it's referencing it. As long as it's not referencing it, let's see if this can, you can drag the sketch below it. You can rearrange the order. So my advice was to take that line, drag it below the photo, reopen that sketch, and start to build your master within there. That was my advice. Does that make sense? If I go back here to the Sriracha bottle, here's the main point. You want to get your reference photo in. You want to get it to be the right size.
But is it?
It could be in the same sketch as the line. That's fine. If that makes more sense to you, that works. Really, the main key is that you have your photo in one sketch and your master in another sketch. It's just two sketches at the top.
How many sketches total?
To build the bottle, you would need 4. Because then what happens when you make this revolve, this sketch is pointing to the master and is copying it over with convert entities. And again, it's all about best practices. By copying that sketch, by having the sketch in this revolve point to the master sketch is like the one-stop shop to make adjustments that will then change for the rest of the file. So again, it's like, here's my bottle. My boss says, you know what? Or again, this is why we had the volume requirements. You have to match this. So now here, my volume's too small. I need to grow bigger. I can I can push this out, uncheck this, and now my bottle's bigger just by going to the master. That's the reasoning for that. Cool. So yeah, just, I don't know, it seems like there was some details and information there, just, yeah. That's unfortunate, but hopefully it makes more sense now. Are there any other questions? Okay. Moving on. Break. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, let's take a 10-minute again. I'll get this going. All right, Mari's bottle. Let's look at this. Yeah, good organization. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, I mentioned in passing, I think, one class, but in general, you always want fillets to be towards the bottom of the tree. So this is good organization. It's not always possible. Like I think I talked about when we did those tutorial, you want a shell after the fillets because you want the shell, when it hollows it out, to take the fillets into account. The reason you want the fillets towards the bottom is often fillets are kind of like a final detailing. It's like telling something how soft you want the transition to be. So being kind of a final surface thing, a final aesthetic thing, you don't want to accidentally build or define off of it. So here's a common error that happens in CAD, in SolidWorks, is you'll put a fillet on there, you'll start a new feature, and you will define the feature from the edge of the fillet. What happens then if you change the fillet and you're defining from that edge, it can ruin the rebuild. So again, it's all about best practices trying to, when I refer to a robust model, it's a model that can be changed without there being too many errors or at least any major errors. Let's look at the master sketch. That's like the main goal here. So off the bat, what I'm seeing that looks good is the bottom line is black and fully defined. There is a gap here, but I'm assuming that it's tied to here. Let's look at this. It is coincident to that point. That's great. Here we have the overall width defined. Everything looks good. Honestly, this is my 2 cents. I would keep this as an arc, not as splines. This, I think, would be too fussy as a spline to me. At the end, we can look at splines after we go through these bottles. Unless anyone specifically wants me to put splines on their bottles, I'm happy to do that. Let's just play with changing the dimension here. That's great. Perfect. There's not much I would change there. Now, if we were talking about production, here's maybe one thing you might want to consider. Dropping a line in here, making it for construction, and then making this tangent. Again, for that same reason of like when they're pushing down the line, that there's like there's something at the shoulder too. So this is the file you had. I created a new line here. So it's from this point. I'm making it vertical. You can see it's black, it's defined. I'm making it for construction so it doesn't affect the model. And I'm taking this top arc and making it tangent to this. Again, this is more of an industry thing, not a design thing or a SolidWorks thing. It's more so that, again, if we're pretending that this is a bottle that's going down a line, by having this in plane with this, when the bottles push on each other on a production line, there's less chance of tipping. Incredibly minor. That's the only thing I'm saying.
That's actually really helpful because that's kind of how I want it to be ultimately like that.
Oh, okay. That's what I would do then. I would use this for construction line to tie those together. Totally fine how you did your push-up here. Like keeping it really simple and just putting a fillets. Like that's.
Would it be easier to make the fillet instead of just that 90-degree angle to draw it as an arc, or to draw the fillet in? Is there like a draw fillet?
Yeah, you could. There is a fillet command in here. It's this sketch fillet where you select 2 edges and you tell the fillet how big to be. You could do that. I like the simplicity of how you did it, honestly. If we go back to mine, on how I did it on the Sriracha, which I no longer have open. If I transform this to be like how I did the Sriracha bottle, I would have this go like this. Whenever you guys have a gray dimension, it means it is defined as driven. The dimension is driven. That means that the length of the line is driving the dimension. Typically the default is that the dimension will tell the line what to do. When the dimension is gray, it's the other way around. The line is telling the dimension what to do. The only time you want that is when you're just trying to pull information. You will get that pop up whenever you over-define something. So if you have 2 things telling something what to do, the second one that you put on there is going to say, do you want this dimension to be driven? Meaning to say, it's asking you in a kind of a polite way, instead of saying like, hey, hold up, you're over-defining this. It's more or less saying, hey, it may even say that, honestly. Here, we can try it. So here's a good example. I may have this line defined this way. Now, if I say, I want this line to be defined from this edge is already defined. Here it's giving me the error. So adding this dimension will make the sketch over-defined. So I guess it does tell you. And then here's where the option is. Make the dimension driven or leave this dimension driving. If I leave the dimension driving, it's over-defined and there's an error. It's going to stay as yellow. Or I guess in this case, green. I don't know. I mean, at some point they changed the colors. I updated my colors so that we'd all see the same thing. And I figured it's better that you guys learn the current version. I'm used to the like old school. But yeah, so here, okay, it's giving you the color code down here. Green is item conflicts, and it's 100% because of this. So if I delete that, that goes away. If I make this the same way that I made my file with my push-up, I did my push-up as like one big arc coming tangentially off of this line. And I just defined my push-up height, which is typically like 1/4 inch, 0.3 inches, whatever that comes to. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Push-ups just tend to be more like dome-like, which is why I did that on the sriracha. I don't know. I am. Oh, yeah. No, I appreciate that. No, please. Yeah. It does. It's misleading. The pause means, yeah, that's a UI UX thing. The pause is so if I click it, it pauses, then it starts recording. But I agree, that's kind of a UI UX thing. I feel like this should be a red circle, right? Like a flashing dot or something. But yeah, it's recording. I see. And I appreciate the reminder. It is very, very possible for me to start talking without recording. So please, yeah, I appreciate the reminders. Did that answer your question, Mari? I forget now what started it. You were asking whether to put a sketch fillet in there. I think what you have is perfectly fine. Again, like I said, the only difference, like super minor, that I might make if I didn't like my model would be to do it with a curve like this, and that makes it more dome-like. I now ruined your model because I changed the master sketch and would have to like go in here and replace stuff. Does that answer your questions? Are there anything else with your model we want to look at? I'll open it again. Okay. It looks good. It looked robust to me. Here's the only negative with the way you built the push-up. Well, actually, ideally, you would have filleted it. I would have expected that.
Okay, so the problem I was having was I couldn't figure out how to rotate like that.
Okay, good question. I take a lot of things for granted. Are you working on this with a mouse, like a standard mouse? Okay, if you click on the center click wheel, you see it here, it's in the recording, it's telling me what I'm doing. Middle click and drag, it pivots it up, and you can look at the bottom. So really, this middle click wheel and dragging is how you tumble the model. And I think we learned with Tom's question, control does this to it, moves, pans. Oh, you're just like constantly shifting the model because like that's just like, yeah.
So when I first got this algorithm, it was like, oh, you can't pay, it's harder to rotate, or it's harder to like pan. I was like freaking out internally.
Gotcha. So I would ideally fillet these in here, Mari. That's maybe the major change I'm making to your model here. Cool. I'm glad we could. And honestly, like if I'm being really nitpicky, I would, in general, guys, I would fillet like this, maybe not as much, but definitely this edge. In general, and especially once we get into rendering, you don't want to leave any corners unless it's like an integral part of your design. And even then, I would argue a corner should be filleted to like 0.05 inches. Because reasoning for that, again, pay attention to everything in real life. Like the only thing in it, well, that's a pretty grand statement, but I'm going to say the only thing in this room that probably doesn't have a fillet is the metal edge on this ruler. Like even like look at your computers and stuff. I guess I could be wrong. Okay. It does, exactly. Yeah, it fillets and soft corners, even if it's 0.05, even if it's incredibly small, it'll catch a bit of a highlight. Whereas if it's a straight line, chances are that you're just going to get one color next to another color, and it's going to look a little more flat and a little more dead. So good habit to get into. Not as important a requirement on this project, but just worth mentioning. All right, cool. Moving on. Trevor. Looks good. Again, fillets at the bottom. Nice organization. Did your bottle didn't have a push-up? Oh no, it does. My bad. It's because it's so that's another thing that a spline does. So you have splines in here. Let's look at them. Okay, that's fine. Sketch just disappeared, so I'm going to close this and reopen it just to be absolutely sure that. So again, unfortunately, I'm noticing, right? Ideally, you have your master and your reference in here. Does that make sense? And I realize, like, with a tree this simple, you can make an argument to not go through that step. But again, that's the whole point of this, was to, like, ideally you would have two sketches above the cap here. You would have the master that the cap and this were copied from, and then like another sketch above that that's a photo of whatever it is you're referencing. Ideally, the hand-drawn sketch. Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, so something like this, I probably wouldn't use a spline for. Again, for those same reasons before, that they're not as definable. There is a chance that splines can, I mean, I guess arcs can also go a bit wonky, but
That's when I was tracing my redesign. So what I initially had was a hard edge that I then filled in.
okay.
That's why I did this one, and I just aligned it.
Sure, that's a good, I'll buy that point that sometimes splines are really good for tracing a sketch to get the fidelity exactly as the sketches. You could make that argument. Yeah, so we haven't looked at splines yet, but since they're in here, we can look at them now. Splines, just like arcs, so again, I try and use an arc when I can keep it simple. With splines, the number of points it has, same thing. I try to get as few points as possible. I feel like this point in there is not as necessary. Ideally, you get this curvature with these lines. And again, it's all to just keep it smooth. Splines are good at being smooth, so the more points you add in there, the more like kind of like, I'm not saying that yours was bumpy, but the more opportunity there would be for there to be like little nuances and bumps and stuff. So the fewer vertices within the spline, the better, if you can get away with that. This is a better use of a spline here, in my opinion. To your point, though, if you're trying to trace a sketch as truthfully as possible and keep those nuances, you can make an argument to use splines. Again, just everyone being aware of the short, what they do well and what they don't. Here, let's see. So that's good. I'm glad you have that spline defined as a tangent. Now here, okay, so here you're talking about you had issues defining stuff. So here you have the origin. And here I can understand. That's the other thing that splines are difficult to, because it's how do you dimension the spline? Just like I said, they're hard to define, not only for engineers and like quality control, but now it can be hard to define also within your model. So here in this instance, I would have this line coincident to this here. I would probably have this spline also tangent to this line. And now I would have this line defined to this origin. And hopefully the line turns black, which I think it does. And now, just like before, I would define from this origin here to get the height of the push-up. So this line being blue is cause for concern. Again, I think the issue here is you're not selecting the origin and making things coincident to them. And again, the origin is the base point that everything is related to. So in this instance, I'm going to select the origin. I'm going to hold Control and select your line here, and I'm going to check coincident. And now, so now you're having some critical things to find, the center line, which is important. Now let's see if we can grow this lower and see what happens. So I'm just going to click on this. So again, here's where a spline falls a little bit short. Do you see that? Because of all these points, the bottom moved down, but the spline kind of did this weird thing. Let's see, if we wanted to try and fix that, again, I would probably delete these points in here. Now, I will say splines are more similar to, what's it called? To Illustrator. So if that's a familiarity, it's not a bad thing. So okay, here what I did, I deleted all those extra vertices that I think are not necessary because you have essentially one clean arc. I'm clicking on this and clicking this here and making them tangent. Again, if you had your sketch in here, I'd be able to look and try and give you some advice. But really, like, if I'm dropping this spline in here fresh, if you have my hotkeys, I think it defaults to S, brings up this menu. Here's a spline here. I would select here and here. It comes in as a straight line. I would make it tangent to this bottom line here. What's going on? Here we go. Sometimes you may need to like get it started because it may default to staying as a straight line. Why is that not working? I'll be honest, I have no idea why that's not working. Let's try making it tangent to this and seeing if that works. So here's my gut. The fact that the spline is in the middle of that line, it may not like that relationship tangentially. So sometimes so what I did is I picked this end line. That's my best guess as to what's going on. Because this line actually ends, making a tangent to that seems to be working. And now I'll make a tangent to this. And now based on what your sketch is in here, instead of adding more points, I would be dragging these lines. So that's how I use a spline. I'm assuming you might have been like clicking along. I don't know if you're using something slightly different. But that's my 2 cents on how I would use it for what it's worth. And now, hopefully, let's take a look at this. If we adjust this height, now do you see how the spline moves along? So it's a little bit cleaner. But again, here we're seeing the same error with the spline now that's creating the push-up. Is now we get to this point, I don't know why this point isn't moving. Right? So splines are a little more finicky. Just be aware of that. They're not bad. I would just use them, again, as drawing a straight line, pulling these anchors, these like direction points out a little bit, and then defining those points. Yeah. That is a great question. Let me make a note of that and do a test. I don't have an answer for you. My gut, no. I believe, so that is the one thing with Illustrator files that's super weird. I would reserve importing Illustrator files purely to like logos. I would try not to do any design with Illustrator files. I believe it comes in sometimes as lots of little arcs. But I'll make a note of import to do something on importing Illustrator files. And we can look at that. Cool. Any other comments or questions here? Same thing. I mean, so beyond splines, like I would have had a line here for construction vertical that's now tangent to this spline, and having this spline be tangent to this. So that, again, for that same reason, well, see, that's, again, with all these points, it makes it a little more awkward. But for the sole point, again, of like if you're going best practices and just like learning about this structural packaging industry, this is a good habit to get into. Cool? All right. Any other comments or questions? All right. Tom's not here, so we'll skip over this for now. I'll come back and look at this loop because there were questions about that. So let's look at Scott's. You had a specific question about this, and we'll see if we can address that. But first off, let's look at your master. So I realize I see your challenge here, right? Because you're trying to see the edge of this. Who was it? You, Trevor, that said you used your pan on your phone? That's cool. That's a good thing to know. So yeah, getting the photo in here, getting it accurate. I don't know. Maybe you need a combo of both. Here, I'll open my Sriracha file. Hopefully, it's still pointed in here. I did this before I scanned it. So if I roll back, here's what I was working with, which was a lot harder. And again, it's a combo of using a ruler or calipers to kind of get these and knowing what to ignore and just doing your best. But again, this is also super helpful for like tracing sketches if someone says, hey, make this design exactly like this. But yeah, so with yours, Scott, I can see here the challenge. Now it does look like, I feel like you should have had this height defined. Again, this base should have been defined. Now this is why your fillet isn't working. Fillets work better on nice long surfaces. Here, because like you have this like little curve here, my guess is the fillet, either it stops when it hits this point, or it stops when it hits this point, one or the other. So let's first look at that. So again, nice having fillets at the bottom. Let's edit this fillet and see where it goes to. Sometimes this is a game that is played in SolidWorks sometimes, yes, where you incrementally make the fillet bigger until it stops. So you can see, do you see guys how the fillet goes right up to this edge here? And now the minute that I go 0.101 bigger, if I click check now, it fails. And then it explains it right here. The radius of the fillet is too large to fit the surrounding geometry. That means that the fillet is trying to grow bigger, but it's reaching a fixed point in space that would like change the model overall. Now there's several ways to fix that. One way is if you actually reorder your fillet. If I put a giant fillet in here. Now in this instance, the fillet works, right? Which I realize this is confusing. Honestly, even to me sometimes, like it's unclear what SolidWorks defines as working and not working. It tends to do, let's see, how can I show this as simply as possible? I'm not building off the origin, don't do that. Okay. Actually, no, this is probably going to work just fine. Let me edit this slightly. So if I fillet this edge here, do you notice when it hits this point, this line here, the fillet starts growing down, right? Because this is a fixed point in space. Now, at some point, it's going to hit this line down here. My gut is it's going to start failing at that point. Do you see that? So it goes, the fillet will grow as far as it can until it meets other edges, and then it's just going to fail at that point. Now, often, this is happening on a much more micro level when you're having issues. On the inside here, it's going to grow all the way out to this edge. So really, that's the way to define it. Do you see that? How now it starts? Now it's no longer tangent to anything on the inside here. It kind of completely deletes that face. But the same thing, it's going to grow all the way till it gets that edge, then it's going to give me an error. So what's going on your bottle, Scott? Is your fillet is growing to this edge? I believe this is tangent. Let's look at it.
Yeah, so I have kind of started understanding what relationships were, and I didn't necessarily go back and fix
That's fine. Okay, sure.
relationships that I had before.
Relationships are everything in life, and it's all works. I should have reversed that. It probably would have been funnier. But yeah, and understanding those relationships, right, and how they affect each other. So that's what's going on here. So here, now that we understand this relationship, so we understand that this fillet is being limited by this point in space. If I now blow out this point in space, or not even blow it out, just leave it as 0.12, I believe this fillet should be able to grow bigger. Oh no, it gave me an error completely. You know what? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe I just moved. You know what? What happened here is now this is the new fixed point in space, is this here. So let's try an experiment. Let's make this really big. I'm going to try and make this so it goes up to this edge. or even beyond. So let's go to here. And now this fillet works. Because what happened is I completely got rid of this face. And now there's a clean blend from this face to this one. Do you see how the edge of the yellow line is like just beyond this or somewhat? And here, actually, if I roll back one, yeah, I blended that face away with a fillet. I mean, ideally, you're not doing that. But why should you ideally not do that? Because it's just not, I don't know, it's not best practice. And you shouldn't be trying to solve things by making fillets really big to get rid of a problem. But now I'm illustrating, now because this is tangent to this, now I can get a fillet on here that can in theory grow to this point. I'll be honest with you guys, if this is somewhat confusing, a lot of this stuff happens on a very micro level in SolidWorks. Like sometimes these surfaces are so small or whatever, you're not paying attention to those details. You're just literally plugging in numbers and seeing what fits. Yep. Yep. Same in SolidWorks. You always want fillets. You want fillets as low as you can get them. Fillets tend to create errors, and they're not very robust. They tend to fail easily because of what I just illustrated. They get defined by lines. Yeah. Do you have a point?
So if you fillet sketch instead of filleting the body at the end, you'll be more prone to errors.
That's a great question. Fillet sketches are that's a good question. Okay, if you fillet sketch early on, are you more prone to errors? I would say no. It's not that you're more prone to errors, because that sketch, especially if it's a situation like this where it's in the master and it's something like a revolve, it's more, because it's built in from the beginning, there's a certain level of robustness there. Now, however, we saw when we dragged stuff around, the things that tended to get goofy are arcs. So that would be a reason to have less arcs, right? You're also kind of, because you're building that fillet in from the start, you're kind of handicapping yourself to that radius. So changing that later on could result in errors. So it's not that it's not robust. It's not that it's prone to failure. It makes it harder to make changes.
But would that, say, be better for the neck of the bottle? To keep that from static.
Like the neck finish, or the neck, or like the flow of the neck?
The neck finish?
Like, are you talking about, here, if we go back to my sriracha bottle, you're saying, like, is it better to put them in like this area?
Yeah.
I mean, again, if we look at what I did, you can see I left a lot for filleting later. Like the curves that I put in were the design curves, the things that changed the aesthetic, kind of. So I think you're going to find two different schools of thought here. My gut is to treat, especially the neck, where it's like the fillets don't matter. They're more in there just because it's the blend. Like I would leave it as straight lines. Again, it's a little more robust for the rebuilds, and just drop them in at the bottom. I think, again, I know I did tell you guys to just sketch all the curves in there, and there's no real right or wrong way. I mean, I think if my best attempt at answering it is, you want to identify what's a key part of the design, and then put that in as a sketched arc. Anything that is like not important to how the design is could be a fillet later on. Does that make sense? Again, this is just my best, this is like how I would have done it. So if you look at my sriracha bottle, I have this and this arc, this bottom arc, this like internal dome, I guess. But, I left this neck finish as right angles. I put in this slight curve for the top here. Does that make sense? So Scott, does that answer your question then about why this fillet was failing? Okay. Now you could have put that in. I mean, if you follow my sriracha bottle, like maybe if I were Scott, I probably would have maybe built that in. Yeah, from the start. All right, so that was an in-depth conversation on filleting. So again, the master sketch, if I'm looking at this here, I think it's same feedback overall. I would have had, so it's kind of, yeah, it seems like you had a weird kind of push up here. Honestly, putting a slight, this might have been an attempt at accuracy, which I appreciate, but generally on the foot, that's something I'm going to leave as a flat, as a horizontal here. And again, I would maybe then have this somehow tied to this point, either with a construction line or telling this line in here to be coincident to this point, and then defining this baseline to the origin. And then you can easily change the height. And then same thing with your bottle. I don't know. Oh, this is the redesign. So actually, like if I'm, again, ideally with the redesign, not a requirement for this project. But if you're thinking about this pushing on a line, I'm repeating myself, you probably want this outer line to be coincident with this guy here. In which case you could select these two lines and you could say make them collinear. Some of this stuff I would challenge you on, like, I don't know, well, no, that's fine. I was going to say maybe this should be made tangent, but maybe not. I guess you have fillets in there later. It might be part of the design. You have these kind of like arc chamfers. You could argue that that's what you were intending. So honestly, I think your master sketch is just a little bit underdefined. It makes it a little bit hard to, change these values.
Yeah, when I was doing the double size one, I realized that I was definitely underdefining myself.
Sure.
I didn't know where to approach certain design. But now it makes total sense now I'm making sure that the base.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So making sure that like certain stuff is just paired to the origin.
Yep.
And like certain stuff is always fixed, so that when you change dimension, it'll still change like the fillets and stuff like that, but it won't change the overall like height of it if you want to just drag on it.
Right.
Yeah, I got it.
Cool. All right. Any other comments or questions? I ruined your design here. I won't save it. Don't worry. Let's look at Tom's. Just mainly for what's going on here, because there was a bit of discussion on how to build this. So this is how he explained it. He revolves. Renaming stuff isn't necessary, but if other people are working in your file, it can be appreciated. You can like organize your tree with folders. This is just an aside. Right click on that, add a new folder. You could say like ring, I don't know, loop, neck, I don't know, name it something. And then you can drag components into this folder. Again, not necessary, only useful if you're sharing files with other people. So let's see, this is how he built the connector. So this is what he was explaining. I don't know if everyone followed. So he started with a spline. And then he did an offset. So that's what this is representing. So anytime you're in a sketch, you can select the spline here, and there's an offset entities command, which basically just gives it an offset. It copies it and moves it a certain direction. Again, there's some features here, left, right, reverse. And then I believe he completed it at the end and closed it out. Now, he didn't need to do that. It is possible. I'll show you how he could have done it a different way. No, instead of closing it out and doing an offset. So I'll copy his spline into this new sketch. Let me hide this now, or hide this rather. So here's the spline that he had. You can extrude with a thickness. So if I just have a single line in the sketch, when I clicked on the extrude command, here it defaults the thin feature to checked. And now I can change the thickness. At some point it fails because it can only offset to a certain distance, but I can tell the feature how thick to make this line. So this is like another way to do it. In this case, you could probably select midplane to have it go both ways, right? Because you want that to be center and whatever the thickness of the plastic is. Now you can see it's like crashing into this here. this is where this merge result is selected. There's auto select where whatever it's touching is going to merge with, or you can uncheck that and manually say, you know what, I want it to merge with just this, or I want it to merge with just this, or both. And apparently there's an error. So I don't know. It's through the merge that's happening. I'm assuming, so when you merge things, sometimes situations like this, where there is like two surfaces in line, sometimes SolidWorks doesn't like it. It can be really fussy with how bodies are merged. And I'm assuming that may be the reason why he did what he did. Let's look at his combine here. So his, I think he stopped it short. No, he went into it. Let's see if this would have merged off the bat. Let me try. Yeah, I don't know why that's failing, I'll be honest. My best guess is oh, you know what it is? My best guess is that he has a straight line here, and here's a spline. Here's another reason why splines aren't the greatest, is because, here, let's do an experiment. Let's see if I'm right or wrong. Let me edit this. I don't know if there's a quick way to do this. I don't want to take too much time. Oh, this offset now is like, I'm going to replace these with straight lines and see if the merge works. I think this is my best guess as to what's happening with the spline. The spline is creating a point. It doesn't like this offset now. Because the spline is not a straight line, and those vertices can have like slight intricacies to them, SolidWorks doesn't like it when there's two surfaces that are really close but not exact. Sometimes it'll give you like a zero thickness error, where like it's trying to merge them, but it doesn't know what to do with like this alignment. Like the alignment is just like slightly off, and SolidWorks doesn't know how to resolve it. Is essentially what's going on. Is my best guess as to what's going on. I could be entirely wrong. I'm going to replace this with a straight line. Even though there's an error, I'm going to hope that it still rebuilds. I think what this red line is saying, it's saying because you modified the original line that this offset is based off of, the offset no longer knows how to resolve. It's saying, hey, you have an error. Do you still want to deal with this? I'm saying, yeah, don't worry about it. And so now here, let's say merge results. I'm going to select this top, and we're going to now see if this works. So now it did merge. So so again, that is another reason splines are good for doing very specific designs. You want to keep them as simple as possible with as few vertices as possible. Be aware that if you have a vertice in alignment with a straight edge, and that vertice, even if it's clicked on it, SolidWorks may not want to merge them because it may perceive that as not perfectly straight, for what it's worth. I don't know why Tom had errors, because it does look like his master sketch, which should be here, yep. So it looks like his origin's a little too tall, in my opinion. I would have put his origin either on here, or I actually don't quite understand how he got it, like why it's where it is. Oh, he probably picked the middle. Did he maybe pick the middle? I don't know. Anyway, if I were Tom, I would have put his origin probably with this here, with this line here. Cool? Any questions? All right. Yeah, hopefully that all makes sense. Let's take another short break, because again, there's lots of talking, so maybe be back at 4:25. We're going to launch into project 2. There was a question